Hey there, booktube. It's Russell. Welcome to the Reading Fabricator, and it's sort of had a bit of a hiatus going on. I haven't published any videos in about 3 weeks, and that's because with my apprenticeship, every 8 to 10 weeks, I go away and do some schooling for 2 weeks, and it's almost impossible to do any sort of reading in that time period. I mean, the amount of stuff they try and cram into a 2 week session for my apprenticeship is just absolutely insane. I just can't get any fictional reading done at all. But I finally got back into it, and I read an old one that I read about 5 years ago when I first started reading. That was The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. Now, about a couple of years ago, I read one of his lesser-known works, To Have and Have Not, and at the time, I declared it to be probably the worst thing I have ever read by anyone. I probably still stand by that statement today. It's just I just didn't care for it. So, having now read a couple of short stories by him as well, which I actually did quite like, I thought, well, has my taste in reading changed? Have I sort of evolved into a different type of reader? So I went back and thought that I would go and read one of the 4 books of his that I read during my formative reading experiences. Of those 4 books, they're basically the 4 big ones. There's The Sun Also Rises, Farewell to Arms, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and then this one here, the last major work of fiction that was published during his lifetime. And at the time, I thought The Old Man and the Sea was a very good book. It was my least favorite of the 3, so I thought I'd do a reread. And also, it's very short. This edition I have here is like 44 pages. It's an incredibly short book. I mean, the thickness of the 2 hardcover sections there are about the same thickness of the actual pages. But I picked up this hardcover because I thought it would look quite good compared to the paperback, which is, the traditional Penguin Classic type one. And I reread it, and I still maintain that it's a very good book. I probably care about it less now than I did back then. I just thought some parts of it were a bit of a slog, even though it is a relatively short book. I mean, most editions are like 100 and 110 pages long. But I still really liked it. I still like the themes he was getting across. I like the declarative sentences that he was portraying in there, and I like the character of Santiago. I thought he was a great character as well. And given that the majority of the book is just being alongside him, he had to be a great character, or else you wouldn't care for it. So yeah, he did a good job with that. The character of Santiago is basically he's an old man, a very old man. He's a Cuban fisherman. He lives off on the coast of Cuba, and he goes out and tries to catch marlin, and he's gone, I think, 84 days or something like that without catching anything. It's like a record for him without catching. It got so bad that about 40 days into the dry spell, his helper, a little boy, got pulled off his boat by the kid's parents and put on another boat that was more successful. So for quite a while now, it's just been Santiago out there trying to catch fish, and he just cannot have any luck with it. I mean, and the way the opening 10 pages of this, my edition, describe it as, is that he lives in extreme poverty. He doesn't eat much. He sleeps in a very uncomfortable bed. He doesn't have many provisions. He doesn't have many belongings. But he does have a very active imagination. And whilst being on many of these trips by himself, he sort of begins to start talking to himself, which he doesn't mind, and he keeps himself company. And he has a love of baseball, and he always has this recurring theme and dream of these lions that he once saw as a younger man on the beach. And it's beautiful imagery so that's a recurring thing that happens throughout this book here. So on the 85th day, after the boy comes and wakes him up, and they get ready and get the boat ready, Santiago bids the boy farewell. He goes out off to the coast, further than he's ever been before. And this time he feels like he can catch something. And he does. He lands a fish, this gigantic marlin. And it's one that's been referenced many times in history. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is the Simpsons episode where Homer's on the lake trying to catch that gigantic legendary fish. And, when he catches it, he says, "I love you, but I must kill you," which is also almost directly on point with some of the lines that are in this book here, where Santiago refers to this large marlin as his brother. And he lands the fish, but for about 5 to 10 pages, you never actually see the fish. It's sort of just dragging the boat along. But then once the fish jumps out of the boat, you find that this thing is huge. It's longer than his actual skiff, which means that when he does catch it, when he kills it, he will not be able to get it on the boat. He'll have to drag it alongside of him. And the battle between the old man and the fish, or even just the sea in general, is a really good one. There's almost thriller aspect to it, especially when you realize that it's now going on for days and nights, where he's trying to slow the fish down and trying to draw it back out again. There's this whole technical stuff involving the lines that he puts out and how he's trying to bring the line in slowly, just having it circle closer and closer to his boat. So there's some technical stuff going on there that I quite enjoyed as well, being from a fisherman point of view. But mostly where this book succeeds for me is actually in the first half. Once he goes out to sea and once he puts the lines out, there's all this wonderful sentences that are structured in this book here that deal with him just being alone and being surrounded by the ocean and being surrounded by all this wildlife. There's talks of dolphins, of Portuguese man-of-wars, of various seabirds that come along. And it's written in such a way that you feel as though you're in the boat with him, that you're next to Santiago while he's describing these events. So that to me is the essence of great writing. And I'm going to read a couple of passages out for you. Both of them are in the first half of the book, or of my edition of the book. So the first one is where he talks about talking to hemself. He did not remember when he had first started to talk aloud when he was by himself. He had sung when he was by himself in the old days, and he had sung at night sometimes when he was alone steering on his watch in the smacks or in the turtle boats. He had probably started to talk aloud when alone, when the boy had left, but he did not remember. When he and the boy fished together, they usually spoke only when it was necessary. They talked at night or when they were storm-bound by bad weather. It was considered a virtue not to talk unnecessarily at sea, and the old man had always considered it so and respected it. But now he said his thoughts aloud many times, since there was no one that they could annoy. The second passage I'll read is more about the descriptions, how Hemingway himself writes the descriptions of the sea and the clouds and that sort of thing. I thought it was quite a wonderful passage. I actually quite like this one quite a lot. The clouds over the land now rose like mountains, and the coast was only a long green line with the grey-blue hills behind it. The water was a dark blue now, so dark that it was almost purple. As he looked down into it, he saw the red sifting of the plankton in the dark water and the strange light the sun made now. He watched his lines to see them go straight down out of sight into the water, and he was happy to see so much plankton because it meant fish. The strange light the sun made in the water, now that the sun was higher, meant good weather, and so did the shape of the clouds over the land. But the bird was almost out of sight now, and nothing showed on the surface of the water but some patches of yellow, sun-bleached sargasso weed, and the purple formalized iridescent gelatinous bladder of a Portuguese man-of-war floating close beside the boat. It turned on its side and then righted itself. It floated cheerfully as a bubble with its long, deadly purple filaments, trailing a yard behind it in the water. Out of everything in that book, and there are some wonderful passages, that might be my favourite one there. It sort of gives you a description of everything, of the sky, of the land, of the ocean, of fish. So it's all that compacted into one paragraph. And that paragraph there, I think, is the true essence of The Old Man and the Sea. That just by reading that, it gives you everything you need to know about what the book is like, about what the book is about how the main character, Santiago, just comprehends everything. Now, I do have a lot of positives about it, and the weird thing is that even though I did like this one less than the first time I read it, I didn't like. I can't think of a reason why I didn't. I like it less. It's a perfectly constructed piece of novella. It's just that maybe I just have moved on to books that I think have a more interesting plot or writing style to my eyes. But Hemingway will always be a formative reading experience for me. He's the one that sort of got me into that mode of reading. So I'm thinking of going and reading, For Whom the Bell Tolls or A Farewell to Arms next. One thing I will say about Hemingway, though, is that he knows how to write an ending. A lot of his books, even in his short stories, have great, great endings. Very fascinating endings. Even the more controversial ones, like A Farewell to Arms, which apparently he wrote multiple times before he chose the ending that he chose. And those who have read A Farewell to Arms will know what I mean by the ending. Specifically the final 15, 20 pages of it. Needless to say, getting back to the story, once he catches the fish and once he kills the fish, then begins his journey back to land. And this is where the sharks come in. And at first it's one shark, and then it's two, then it just keeps getting higher and higher, and he keeps trying to kill these sharks. But every time sharks come, they take bits and bits and bits of the marlin until eventually there's nothing left by the time he gets back to land. So it's quite a sad thing, really. But he did conquer this fish, and that's the one thing he's proud of, that he did finally break his dry spell, that he conquered this fish, that he landed this fish, that he can prove that he still has it, basically, that he hasn't lost his style of fishing. And there's this wonderful imagery where he gets back to land and he goes into his hut and the boy goes to find him. And as he's going past, all these people are just standing there at the coast next to his boat, looking at the size of this marlin, being in absolute awe of it. By now, it's just a skeleton with a tail and a head. And yeah, it's just there's little things like that peppered throughout the book of true imagery, including that passage that I just read to you, that are reasons why this book has probably been assigned to many high schoolers out there. Although, for those of you out there who have read this as part of a high school curriculum or even a college curriculum, I say read it in your own time. Read it again, because chances are you would have hated it because it was assigned to you and you had to do a research assignment on it. But if you were to just read it at your own pleasure, at your own pace, I'm sure you'll like it a hell of a lot better. I know I did. Even when I reread some of the books I read in high school, I found them to be far better experiences post-high school, pretty much. But do I consider The Old Man and the Sea to be the starting point for Hemingway for people? No, I don't think so. I mean, yes, this was the last major work of fiction of his life. Yes, this is the book that won the Pulitzer Prize. Personally, I think he should have won for Whom the Bell Tolls, which I think was a pretty great book. But I say a good starting point for Hemingway is actually A Farewell to Arms. It's a decent book. It's about 300 pages long, but it flies by quite good. And there's a lot of wonderful passages in that book as well that I think rival this one, or if not, they're better. Also, check out his short stories, particularly Hills Like White Elephants, which deals with, I think that's the one that deals with abortion as well. That was quite a good story. I really like that one there. And there's also the one involving the old man at the cafe. I think the title of it goes over my head. But Hemingway will always be a writer that will be remembered. He won't be forgotten. And there's plenty of people out there that are haters. Like, I know someone whose auntie who has studied literature and is quite well versed in books, absolutely despises Hemingway, just really despises him. But there are just as many people out there who absolutely love him as well. So I think he's a decent writer. He may not be my favorite now compared to what I read in the time since, but I still look to him as an influence. And when writing about life and death, I mean, the only other person I can think of that rivals him is Cormac McCarthy. So yeah, there are wonderful pieces of work out there by this author, and I do recommend The Old Man and the Sea. As I said before, I don't like it as much now as I did the first time I read it, but there is still something in this book that draws me to it, and that's a good thing. I think if a book can bring you back to it for a reread, then there must be something going for it, right? Again, sorry for the late post, and there's been plenty of comments by people I haven't responded to, so I have to respond to them as well. But as I said before, it's because I had welding qualifications to get. But now I'm going to get back into reading. I'm currently reading William S. Burroughs' semi-autobiographical book, Junkie, which is quite an experience. The only other thing I've read by him is Naked Lunch, so I'm looking forward to reviewing that. It's a short book as well, so I should be able to get a review out in the next few days. Other than that, have you read The Old Man and the Sea? Have you read Ernest Hemingway? What's your favourite Ernest Hemingway book? Again, I think my personal favourite might be For Whom the Bell Tolls. Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks very much, people. See ya and goodbye.